All right. So we're not live. I believe we should be up on all these social media thingies. Um,
On all of
so
them.
on all, well, so here's where we are actually. We are
Okay.
on my personal Facebook page, Facebook profile. So my friends could potentially all see this, which is embarrassing. We're on our Remake Facebook page. We are live on YouTube. We are live on my personal Twitter account. We're live on the company Twitter account, and we're live on my personal LinkedIn account. And the
Has
personal
no one
LinkedIn
ever
account,
told you that you need to separate life and work, Eran?
life and work. I don't. I mean, people have said that, but I never really took it seriously. Um, but I guess this is my company and this is my life, right? So I don't. So that separation is um, kind of fake, but it's interesting. So these are not all equal, right? Um, because I think we have like 50 follow. I think we have 50 followers on YouTube. I think we have
It's a
like
start.
1,000, 1,500 on Twitter, the company account. But on LinkedIn, I have like 14,000 followers. So that's
Cool.
really
That's
the large channel. But we'll see, and it's growing. I started doing. I think I showed you this before, but like I got this
this is your
dedicated
social
Google Pixel phone,
socials
this
phone.
social media only phone. Um,
And are you still locking it away?
oh my god, yes. No, so it's now. So I have. Um, I use an
And I
app
mean
called
really locking it
Freedom.
away. He's putting it in a safe.
Well, it's a multi-layered system. Okay, so the first layer of defense is I have this app called Freedom, and it's installed on uh, my phone, my Android phone, which is the work social phone, my iPhone, my iPad, and my computer. And it has different rules for different times for both. So first of all, up until noon, no social media and no news on any device. So even if I wanted to, I couldn't check my social media on this. So during the Ukraine crisis, I actually brought news back. But
Mm.
as soon as it's resolved and there's no ongoing crisis that I want to check on, um, no news. And then so this is the first layer of defense. And so this phone can be used for social media only from 12 to 8 p.m., I believe, right? And the other phones not even in that time. So the other devices, no social media. And then I have a physical metal safe uh, that
This
I
is the bit I
lock, and
love.
it's on a key. Yeah. And now I drilled a hole into it, so there's two power
So
cables
your
going
phones
into
can
it.
breathe. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Sort
It's
of,
like
right? So that
leaving
I
a
can
window
charge them.
open for the dog in the car
It's exactly like drilling holes in like a kitten or
for
like
a
a turtle.
hamster.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like two cables in, one for the Android, one for the iPhone, and they both go in there at night. And I don't unlock the box until I leave home. So the first thing I do is I unlock it when I go out for a walk or for a run. I do take my iPhone with me, but again, it doesn't even have social media apps on it. And that stays in, and that gets unlocked when it's time for work, which is also when the apps are operational. So that's what I'm doing, and it's working quite well. Like so, I
Do you
I
miss it?
don't
Do you
waste a
miss
lot of
it
time.
like at night or something when it's locked away? Are you ever tempted to? Because it's only one extra step, right? You just have to get the key or put in the
I
code or whatever it
occasionally,
is.
I occasionally miss it where I just want to check something, or I have an idea and I want to write it down. So what I do now is I just write a note in Apple Notes, like for Twitter, like, something that I want to post or something. But I don't like after a while, like, it really kind of stops being an addiction, and I'm now used to having mornings to myself. So I don't, I don't, and the best is when I don't even have news, because now I still wake up in the morning, and sometime with my morning coffee already reading about Ukraine, because I want to know if anything terrible happened. But I mean, anything more terrible than usual.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
But the period, there was like a month or so where even no news and no social, like literally that there's nothing for you to do. And then now Saturdays, I actually block all social media on all devices, all social media, and I literally I don't even touch my phone. I barely touch my phone on Saturday. I mean, there's nothing to do. Like, it's boring.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of brilliant, but I also find it, almost sad that we have to sort of discipline ourselves like that, because it is so addictive. But I don't know.
Is it that are you concerned, or does it not feel necessary, or does it feel necessary and you're just...
No, I think it does feel necessary, and that's why I don't like. I think the fact that we need it, that we can't do it ourselves, I don't know, doesn't feel great, I think.
Yeah. So it's not great, but like two things that we need to remember is, one is these companies, these social media giants, and I'm actually talking less about Twitter, but even Twitter a little bit probably, but Facebook, YouTube, they employ psychological manipulation experts who, have studied gambling addiction and how to cause it, right? So a lot of the dynamics. So just for instance, like that, when you kind of pull on the feed and it twirls for a while, and then you get new posts, that's modeled on the roulette wheel and the addiction to the roulette wheel. And it's exactly, it actually doesn't need to twirl at all. They could, whenever you pull, we could give you new posts right away. They are waiting the exact number of seconds that will create the most addiction, because it creates a little bit of a suspense, and then you get
then the kick.
And yeah, exactly. And then another really obvious dynamic that's really horrible is, we're all kind of used to it, so that we're not thinking it's, it didn't have to be this way. But how when you open a feed and there's posts, and then know that if you don't read them now, they won't be there again. Right? If you close, if you refresh,
and you scroll back up to try and find them,
they're gone, right? And so why do they completely change the feed every time you log in? It is to create this sense of urgency that's completely fake. Like, you absolutely do not need to look at these posts right now unless you want to. But they've created this artificial way in which you're not, you might not get them again. So I think I think it's really interesting. The other so the other thing that I wanted to say about this is, like, there's massive AI algorithms pointing at your brain behind that feed. So the Facebook algorithm knows you so well, if you're a Facebook user, that it knows before you do that you're about to exit, and it keeps some posts that will keep you there for longer. So right when you're about to leave, it already knows, and then it shows you a picture of your friend doing something amazing that it could have shown you first thing, but it's keeping that for the moment that you're about to leave. And then or like a cat, like some cat video that's just going to grab you. And that algorithm is just like we're not designed to withstand that kind of mass manipulation based on so much data and so much. So it it's not us being weak. It's really the um you know it's really thanks Terry. Terry's writing in the chat and it's distracting me. So this is, I think this is LinkedIn. She's
Okay.
watching live on. She or he. I can't see who this is. But
They want you to hurry up, basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop hesitating. Just spit it out.
I can't. No, I can't do that. Because I'm actually thinking that you can see that this is not scripted. But I think we should stop feeling bad about not having the willpower to withstand these billion-dollar machines pointed at our human frailties. We're humans and we're hackable and we're easy. Like our emotional mechanism is not that complex. There's a reason why boobs are used to promote clicks, right? We're not that sophisticated and we're not that hard to figure out, right? If you're let's say a guy and you're tired and you're scrolling through and one of the articles has like a thumbnail with boobs, you're just more likely to click it. And so I think that we shouldn't feel bad about it. We should get strategic about it, right? And so we should create the systems and the circumstances where we can't really be manipulated. And the way that I do this is with creating friction. And this is not just me, like a Distractable. Who wrote Distractable? I forgot his Near Indistractable. It's a book I read recently. Yeah, Neil Ayala. It's like a famous Israeli writer. It's about creating frictions. So the things we want to do less of, we have to make less more frictionful. So I think that we have to, we have to kind of think about how to and tie.
I think you might be getting some friction for your examples of what attracts attention.
Yeah.
Here.
Well, I agree with you. It's not appropriate. But I think this is me criticizing the use, right, and the manipulation. You call it what you want, and it's not necessarily female anatomy. It's anything, right? It's like they use whatever they can find that triggers us, and it's everyone. It's like these companies. There's a reason why you see certain stories, right, in Instagram and in
they're not
in
chronological
Facebook
anymore, are they?
They know what they know what's gonna trigger you, right? And so that use is really is really cynical, and so that's what I'm criticizing. And so if I'm using strong language, it's not to identify with what you're doing, it's to criticize what you're doing. But I think there's it's actually really distracting. So I'm gonna actually remove the chat because it's too distracting for me to look at the chat while talking. So I'm gonna have something else there. But and then we'll deal with comments as they after we're done maybe. But I think that this is one of the things that really occupy a lot of my time is how to reclaim my own attention and how to use it appropriately, and how to not be so easy to manipulate. And frankly, they use technology against us, so we should be able to use technology against them, right? And so whether it's a safe or like a blocking software or anything like that, you can set the boundaries when you're with your full capacity, right? When you're concentrated, when you're your best self, and apply those rules when you're weak, when you're tired, when you're scrolling at the end of the day, when you're, and that's when they try to get you to spend another half hour, or
It's interesting as well, how difficult it is to actually delete these apps, to just do the simple, even if you're kind of sick of it, you're sick of the scrolling. And I was speaking to someone who, was really addicted to TikTok, and then persuaded them to delete it. And then a week later, like, I had a kind of a weak moment. So we're not, no, I totally see what you mean.
But even there, like, I don't think that you should,
it's
judge
not
yourself.
It's how can we blame ourselves if we're being...
That's where your friends are. That's where the people you're trying to communicate with are, right? Like, that's where, so, there was like a Facebook blackout a couple months ago, where like no Facebook services were working. And I literally, there were a couple of friends I needed to get in touch with, and I didn't know how, because we either use WhatsApp or we use Messenger or we use I ended up, luckily we still have like the traditional phone numbers, right? In that case, I could find it. But it's too integrated. So we have to be.
Is it ironic that we're doing this chat over all the platforms that we're talking about?
I don't know. Again, I'm not against using these platforms, and I'm not against. And by the way, LinkedIn is, I find LinkedIn and then Twitter much more responsible in how they've approached things, and they clearly are working on it. So I like the new Twitter downvote feature, which allows people to essentially self-regulate and self-moderate. And, if enough people say, essentially the more people say this is not so useful, the less people will see it, and down the list it goes. So I think that's a really good step that they're taking. And a lot of these issues, they're solvable. They're absolutely solvable on a product level. And we could all be benefiting from these platforms and not suffering the consequences of addiction if they made those decisions, if they decided, let's not create something addictive, let's create something beneficial. And I think regulation is also a part of it. So I think at some point, honestly, if you're using psychological manipulation techniques from the world of gambling, you should be regulated like gambling. It's not different from gambling. And so if you want to stay above the board and not be regulated, then don't use psychological manipulation tricks that make people get addicted.
So I guess, and you must also look at it from a design perspective, I suppose, because there's a business angle here as well. But how do you look at this from the design? How do you think this is bad design? Or very good design, but for the wrong reasons?
Yeah, I think it's well, Twitter's design is getting better. Twitter's design traditionally hasn't been that great. But Facebook's design is, we can I'll get into it in a second. Okay. But what I was going to say is Facebook's design is great. Their values suck, right? So the designers are accomplishing what their values are dictating, right? Engagement above almost anything. Communication, again, above almost anything. And I think, when I look at the designs, they're very effective. So I don't think this is bad design, though. If their values change, then the design will have to change. And the design will no longer be good for the values. Twitter has always been behind They are now beginning to do some very cool things, but it's only like literally in recent months. But for years, first of all, they didn't change much. Like one of these things where you see like users making up features because the company is so slow to respond. So like hashtags. This is like a way for users to create topics and communities because the company just did not give them that tool, right? Um, and it turns into something cool, but it's entirely culture based. It's not design based.
Mm.
And for the longest time, like, I actually think that the way conversations happen on Twitter has some good things going for it, but like it's well behind other platforms. I think Facebook does a good job of like discussions and in comments, and Reddit does a better job. So Twitter always had culture going for it. There's like this really great culture of discussion, but it almost had to go over. It almost had to like overcome the very limiting design. Just the idea that for the longest time it was 144 characters, and then they were like, after years of people asking for more, they brought it up to like 200 and something characters. And then if you want to write something longer, you have to hack it by doing like the series, and it's not even auto numbered. So then you have to go. It's part of the charm, but again, it's culture. So the charm is, oh my god, this is so crappy, but we like each other, and we like the culture, so let's make up ways to get around
this severe
limitations. Yeah, let's make it work. So I wouldn't call it good design. And also, I mean, they've not been very effective in monetizing. They've not been very. I think now they're beginning to do some interesting things. So they're like doing. They're looking at Clubhouse, and they brought in the audio spaces, which is cool. They are now doing NFT avatars, where like if you look at a person's avatar, if they have their wallet connected, and that will give you ways to support creators. And they're going to bring in newsletters into it, so you could have your followers also receive longer form newsletter. So I think they're going to do a lot of, and they are already doing a lot of cool things. But it just took forever. Like forever, they weren't like really. It didn't even change. Like in the world of software, how rare it is to see a piece of software just year after year barely changing. Like that's it. You're done for 5 years. Like there's like no requests,
it's still
users,
like
there's no needs, no unmet needs.
Yeah.
And actually, if you look, I mean, Facebook has way more users, actual normal day-to-day users. Like, so Twitter is mostly certain kinds of famous people. Like it's the media, it's certain kinds of famous people. And then a lot of people just use it to kind of stalk famous people. But it's not like a daily part of life like Facebook is and like LinkedIn is.
You were mentioning audio spaces on Twitter. I thought maybe we could jump into talking a little bit about the podcasts.
Yeah.
The Remake Podcast.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I've just finished editing the episode with Shari Davis. Brilliant interview. It sounds like you had a lot of fun. It sounds like you two had a lot of fun with that. How was it?
Yeah. Oh my God. Look, Shari is amazing. So I think this, just kind of say who Shari is. She was the director of youth engagement and employment for the city of Boston, and she got deeply involved there with participatory budgeting in Boston. And now has joined the participatory budgeting. We also laugh about how hard it is to say participatory budgeting. Participatory budgeting project. The participatory PBP, Participatory Budgeting Project, which is where they've helped. There's thousands of participatory budgeting projects around the world with governments and cities and large organizations, where essentially the idea is to allocate a certain part of the budget to a collective group effort. And I think so. I think that's the conversation was really really cool, because she's really
cool.
a people. She's cool, but she's an organizer of people. That's what she does. She's an includer of people. And so if you, as I did for this interview, I had to go and watch a few of her public talks. And, it's one of the striking things, like one of the most amazing things is like how she engages the questions from the crowd. So a normal person is like, I mean, not to say that she's not normal, she's better than normal, but like a normal speaker would, be like, I'm on stage. Okay, so you're asking me a question. So the light is still on me. I'm going to listen to your question very politely and then give you my opinion from on high. And then at all times, I'm still at the center. And what Shari does is completely the opposite. It's like, can you repeat that? How do you feel about that? Like, she's making it about the questioner and including them and including their perspective in the discussion. And you can tell that that's what she's been doing with participatory budgeting, is finding ways to include people and finding ways to include people who are not used to being included in these sorts of discussion. So
yeah, and it's interesting that you said she's a organizer of people, because it's really about not organizing from above, but organizing together and designing. So the sort of decision-making processes from the very beginning, like you set the rules together, which I thought was really interesting. There's no formula.
Yeah.
Well, there is a formula, but it's a very open formula that you use together to find how to divvy up money, basically, in that case. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that also what you got?
Essentially, the process is get a lot of money, a significant amount of money, kind of put aside for this purpose, create a steering committee to decide on the rules of the game, and then just follow the rules that you create together on how to include and how to vote and how to, and it's kind of like, it sounds like a lot of creative chaos, but in the best possible way, like the best, like breaking into discussion groups, bringing proposals, like voting on them. So but I think the amazing thing here is like the great results that it actually creates, right? So again and again, like you see lower corruption, more effectiveness, and also people getting closer, people understanding the trade-offs, understanding the complexity of the problem because they've been involved with the process. And now, and people who come in, what was the funny example? There's a lady who comes in like her number one priority.
Parks for the cats.
Yeah,
right?
Cat park. Number one priority for the city is a new cat park. There's dog parks everywhere. It's not fair. She's coming in with, and then she's in a room with all these other priorities, and listens to other priorities and said, you know what? I realize cat park is probably not the first priority, and she ends up voting for someone else's suggestion.
Yeah, I think it was someone who said, we really need new toilets in schools, in local schools.
Yep. Yeah.
And that was what made her think, okay, I'd still like my cat park, but maybe we can leave that to the next budget meeting.
Yeah. So I think that was really, that was a great conversation, and I can't wait for people to hear it. And by the way, we kept talking after we stopped recording, And we were thinking together about, well, how could I get involved with, like, I mean, I love that stuff. So there's actually quite a few projects, and when the episode comes out, we'll put all of that in the show notes. But there's a few projects where they're seeking volunteers, they're seeking people with like design skills, they're seeking people with different kinds of skills, where you could easily make a difference. And I think that's really, really important here. Is participatory budgeting itself is participatory as a way to how to bring it to new communities. And so I think that's going to make a massive difference over time.
I was kind of wondering, well, it made me think that, because you're a designer, you're from a design background, and the podcast has this design focus, but this is really design in the sort of broadest sense.
Yeah.
Maybe you could, like, how do you relate this idea of kind of participatory budgeting as an idea, sort of new ways of doing local government, with design? What is design in that case?
Yeah. So what is design, right? So I think, like, when people think about design, there's a couple of categories of how people think about it. The one that's too limiting, I think, and clearly wrong, is to think about design as the way something looks, right? That's like pure surface, right? And not to say that there aren't designers out there who are only concerned with the way something looks, like the specific graphic designers, visual designers. That's what they do, but that's a small part of designers. And so there's this famous quote from Steve Jobs, I believe, said something like, "Design is not what it looks like. Design is what it does." Right. And so that's a much broader way to think about design. And so now through the podcast, I've got to interview quite a few number of really prominent designers, and I actually think that in the broadest possible way is design is not a rejection, but a seeing of the current reality as just one possible state of many other possible states, right? So seeing the current reality as, okay, it is that way now, but it doesn't have to be. So that's where design starts, is just saying, and there's another beautiful quote from Steve Jobs. I wish I could find it. I actually showed it to Jake Knapp in the Jake Knapp episode. But it's all about kind of seeing everything around you as something that was designed by people no smarter than you, and at some point in time, right? And it is that way now, but it doesn't have to be. Someone could redesign it. Someone could design it better next time, right? And it's true of everything. It's true of democracy. This is true of architecture. This is true of processes. Work processes that are constantly being reinvented, and of course products and the things we use every day. So I would say design. So that's number one. That's where it starts, and then it's using all of your human faculties, your ability to learn and research and understand and empathize, and your imagination to create a different vision for whatever this thing is. So a different vision for this product, a different vision for the way budgeting is done in a government. So you use your imagination to create a new vision, and use all of your human faculties to create a new vision. And the reason why I say vision and not to just do and to build a new thing is, I think in building, that's where you get into engineering. So really, there's a spectrum somewhere between designer and engineer, where the engineer is ultimately more towards the side of actually making this thing work, and the designer is more on the side of what's the vision, what's the new vision that we want to build, what is the how could this be better than it is. And so to me, this is what design is. And everyone that I talk to on the podcast, I consider a designer, almost everyone. And they wouldn't necessarily call themselves a designer, but what they engage with is creating a new thing that's different from the current reality in situations of ambiguity, and what's the right thing to build. And they have to go through this discovery process, and create a new vision for how things could be, and then bring it about, or try to bring it about. So to me, Shari is a designer.
I think it's a great way to. Yeah, that's exactly what I was wondering. Now, I have to say, I've only just noticed. I couldn't see the comments until now, and this is one of the first times that I'm doing this. So, but we've had one super active commenter, Ty. I don't know. I think he really wants to be involved. I don't know if he wants to ask a question or be asked a question. I'm trying to catch up with the comments, but let's see what he says.
I'm sorry, we can't. Ty, whoever you are, we appreciate the comments, but I can't have a conversation with you and a lot of people in the comments at the same time. So I think I actually thank you for your comments. We may respond later in the comment section, but I can't keep split my attention like that. So I actually tried in the beginning, and then I couldn't do it. So I think that to me, Shari is a designer, is continuing to design, is continuing to refine her toolkit. And the cool thing is, it's not like just one thing called participatory budgeting that she's designed. Every time she goes to a new place in a new city, there must be a design process going on for how is this particular challenge in this particular community going to be solved, how to reach out to these particular communities that have not been included in this place, and make sure that they are included. All of that stuff is like design. And then the cool thing about designers is there's a quote from Michelangelo. I believe it goes something like, he who does not make his tools does not make his sculptures. So if you buy ready-made tools to use on your sculptures, the person who created the tool had a lot to do with your sculpture. And so a designer designs their own tools. That's a big part of being a designer, is creating the toolkit, creating the processes and the methodologies and the approaches that you bring then to design. So and I think Shari's doing that as well, right? Like they're building like a playbook for this that they bring to every new project.
Another thing I enjoyed about what she has this real trust in young people, and I think that comes. You talk a lot about her being given that. Being given that trust when she was young, and I think that's an interesting conversation that you have about that. But that's something that that I enjoyed listening to, and I think people will. It's as I guess a self-identifying young person still. It's nice to hear that it is okay to give young people decision-making power, and they do know things, and they can be trusted to do things. I found that interesting. And an interesting part of that design process that you're talking about, to choose to give that power to young people.
And it's really, it has a really nice echo from Max Rashbrook's episode, and he's not talking about young people, he's just talking about non-politicians and non-experts. And he says, actually, if you put non-experts in an environment that allows them to thoughtfully and in a structured way hear different opinions, come to discuss them in a systematic way and vote on them, the results are astounding. Experts are consistently astounded by the results. And I think young people, if I mean, and not to sound like an old person talking about young people, so, but when I was younger, what I was missing compared to now is knowledge and expertise, right? And so to me, maybe it's the same spectrum. Is like both when you're young or when you're older, but you're not necessarily an expert on, like, I don't know, infrastructure, city infrastructure. In both of these cases, that shouldn't disqualify you from being a participant, a thinker, someone who can learn about the problem, kind of synthesize the information, discuss it with other people, and then form a decision. And both of these guests are saying the results are actually better than when politicians do it and so-called experts.
Or when they do it alone, at least.
When they correct, but the results are better than any expert thought they would be, and better than the current system sometimes we have, which are politicians discussing with experts and then voting, amongst themselves. It turns out there's more corruption that way, right? It turns out that that it's not very inclusive. Whereas if you go out to the people and you include everybody and you put them in the right framework, the decisions are really, really high quality. And I have no problem believing that. That's normal people, everyday regular people are amazing, right? They're we still have the same supercomputer in our brains, and the thing that's missing is like a process of being informed, of listening to a lot of opinions, of engaging with other people's ideas, of having empathy, and yeah, I mean, it's it doesn't shock me that this is the case.
Yeah, maybe we can give an example of the sort of the success that these things have. So it's stuff like in the participatory budgeting example, when you give people the power to discuss and really dig into what a community needs and wants, they come up with really great solutions about how money should be spent, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think in Boston, one of the examples is they put a certain amount of money towards buying a laptop for every high school student that couldn't afford it. And it's so effective. It amplifies their ability to study in such a massive way. And yet, that's not something that politicians would vote on. And then just when you kind of read, it's hard to, it's not the anecdotal thing that is really breathtaking. I think it's what's really amazing is when you look at the budget and you're like, oh my God, they divided this money in such a smart way. And they put a little bit for laptops and a little bit for here and then a little bit. And so to me, that's what's amazing is like you just feel like it's a whole completely different set of values and priorities than you'd get from a bunch of politicians. Not to necessarily disparage politician, I actually think public service is potentially a great vocation if you do it right. But it's
I think
systemic.
There's also a distinction between politicians as such and the sort of yeah, civil service bureaucracies that exists, right?
Yeah,
That are
but even
making a lot of the
politicians.
smaller scale decisions. Not to, I think both are involved in that, in the conventional
Yeah,
decision making.
look at what Zelensky is doing for the Ukraine right now, right? He's a politician, but we're not tempted to disparage him, right? Because what he's doing is clearly essential, and he's putting his own life at risk. And you know that's what politics could be for people, right? It could be about the things that unite us. It could be about public service. Um, so the fact that it's not always like that, I think, is systemic. It's the design of our systems um, that makes it so, and then we can dive into what's so dysfunctional about the system. But it wasn't always like
I
this.
think we
Also,
have, right? I think we have started to talk about what some of the problems are with those systems through some of these solutions that people are proposing.
correct. But
But if
I
you want
think,
to
and
elaborate on the problems,
every guest highlights something else, right? So that's the fun thing of having a podcast, because they're all like talking about some other missing piece. But to me, there's clearly been an evolution, and in this case, not for the better, of the systems. So uh, I do believe that 100 years ago, democracy was much healthier than it is today. Um, in that it was working better than it does today. Not talking about policies or culture or beliefs, or the types of laws that we passed, but as a democratic system. And that's because the bad players were not as sophisticated at hacking democracy. And so when you get to politicians, where, I mean, with gerrymandering in the US, effectively the politicians are drawing the lines of the districts that are then voting them, and they're drawing this in such a way that they can't lose, right? So it's just a reverse process. Now the politicians are selecting who their voters are going to be, right? Instead of the voters selecting who the politicians are going to be. And so and the same with like propaganda and media and big money and like lobbying. They all just got so sophisticated at hacking the system with time, um, and have created a power base that some renewal is necessary, and it's not. And then technology obviously is a complicating factor, but I do think it's something that evolved over time. I don't think, you know, I'm not at all a cynic about democracy, in the 18th and 19th century. I think it was something very idealistic that they were doing, to leave monarchy and leave traditional forms of government and try to create a democratic system. I think it was really a step in the right direction, but now we need to deal with new challenges and also new, much more sophisticated enemies of democracy.
Interesting. I mean, you said it, but I think it's also worth repeating that there were some significant issues with those early democracies too, in different ways. Maybe.
Yeah. But you have to kind of, yeah. So what do you mean by that specifically?
I mean, there was also still a choice about who could vote. There was still a political choice about who the voters were by the people in power. It may have that those mechanisms may have become more sophisticated, but they're, I don't know. Would you say that they were always there?
So there's one sense in which we have clearly gotten better and better and better, and that's like the circle of who gets to vote, right? So first it was just property owning males, and then it was, and
White
then,
males as well.
well, yeah, I guess it depends on what country I mean,
True,
in
we're in
Greece,
different
pretty much
contexts.
everyone, yeah. So it was property owner, and then it kept expanding, right? And we added women, and we added minorities, and we added and so, but so in that sense, clearly, and then when we talk about civil rights, clearly a massive improvement in the system. But the basics, to put that aside, and I agree with you there, but with the basic system of me as someone who has a vote, my ability to find someone who actually represents me and isn't subject to foreign interests, my ability to, if I'm unhappy, if enough of us are deeply unhappy about something, our ability to be sure that it's going to get fixed, right? That was healthier, I think, 100 years ago. Again, granted that the circle is much smaller, but now a lot more people have the vote, but the vote means a lot less. That's what I guess that would be my formulation. And the vote means less because there's all of these sophisticated systems that have been designed to make it mean less, because they have their interests and they don't really much care what you think. And so we've given a lot more people to vote, and we've made it mean much less. And so now we have to fix that and make sure that the vote means something again. It's very substantial. You can't make 60% of the population unhappy and still be the president. And that's, in the US, that's the case. Like, and I mean, you can make it, you can have more than 60% of the people against you and still win with the electors, which is quite crazy. So anyway,
yeah, there's many ways to go there.
for sure.
I had a question I wanted to ask. This is very random.
Okay.
In this context.
Shoot.
But it was it's something I wanted to ask a designer, and because I was thinking about in school we always had this award for like who was the most improved person, and it always felt like it always suggested it came from a low bar, but hey, I was so if you could give that award to any thing for design, so the most improved design, what would it be? And I'm thinking about your Twitter example. Like, it started pretty low, and it's kind of slowly learned from the culture of Twitter and from people's demands. So I don't know if something springs to mind. Is there something that, and it can be any scale, anywhere on the design scale, you're talking about a sort of material product or a really large systemic thing. Is there something you feel like has embraced the idea of good design and kind of learned?
So there's a couple of examples in history, and then there's the kind of the immediate things that come to mind. So starting with the immediate thing, I do think Twitter is one of those companies to watch now, with their attention to redesigning their platform to make it more helpful, just to have more helpful conversation happening, to get more of the culture actually engaging on Twitter, to have more thoughtful, maybe longer form conversations. So I think, and Twitter has gone from like barely changing anything for years, like even when clearly there was a massive need and everybody was asking for something, they weren't touching it. So Twitter is one of those examples. I think Microsoft is another great example, where for the longest time, and this is actually documented, but I believe, for years, the slogan from Microsoft internally was Windows first, which was the purpose of every product you build is to make people get on the Windows bandwagon, right, and buy Windows. And then came in the new CEO. I'm terrible with names, but Satya Nadella. That's what I was thinking, Satya Nadella, but I wasn't quite sure. And so he comes in and he changes the motto. It's no longer Windows first. Now it's build products that people want to use, which sounds so. And so suddenly,
it's clunky.
But I know, but it's specifically, it's not really their slogan. It's specifically a response to Windows first. And so suddenly they launched all of these amazing Android and iOS apps, where you have great Office apps for Mac, for iOS, for you have and they started building, this business operating system in the cloud through Teams and a lot of the things that are now connected with Team and the Microsoft Cloud, where, I used to not, I would never even thought that I would have even considered going back to Microsoft products. But now I use several Microsoft products, and Office is great online. And, I occasionally, Teams is still not great compared to the alternatives, but, I've used it. Now I have it installed and I have an account and I'm paying monthly for it, right? Because some of our clients use it. So Microsoft is clearly on a road for like some big improvements, and they're doing some really interesting things, but still a little bit clunky. The classic example is Intuit, which did QuickBooks as an early accounting software, and then hired IDEO, which is a legendary design company, to reshape the entire company to be more design driven. And today they're considered, maybe the second most design driven company after Apple in everything they do. And I actually got to work with Intuit last year on a project where they were trying to expand their design department in Israel. And I got to talk to a lot of people within the company to understand their unique design culture, to understand their design processes and everything, so that I can find the right people to bring to form this crux of this new team. And I was blown away. So one of the only companies in the world where, as a designer, your boss is going to be also a designer, a more senior, more experienced designer. Your boss is not going to be the chief technology officer, right? Who doesn't care about design. And the whole system. So every new, this was mind blowing to me. Every new employee at Intuit, whether it's a salesperson, an engineer, what have you, has to take a boot camp to learn about the power of design and design thinking as they're joining the company. They want to make it part of the culture. So they are amazing, and they have a series of really crazy products for businesses. For instance, one of the recent beautiful examples is now, because QuickBooks, you can create invoices for your customer, right? So now they have a product where you can create an invoice for a customer and immediately get paid. So it's essentially, there's a bank behind the scenes lending you the money.
I think I've seen this. Invoice. Yeah.
So you're like, send an invoice, money's in your account immediately, and then once it's actually paid, it automatically pays it back, and you and so that's a process of this is a design-driven process, understanding where people's, small businesses are really struggling with cash flow. It's not, you have a lot of projects, but sometimes the money doesn't come in time, and you're kind of stuck. So,
and who's paying for that? Who's paying on that loan?
you are like the business owner, like you essentially
Okay.
there's a very, I think it's like 1% fee or something, but you can essentially wait until the client pays or get the money deposited now for a small fee, which
Mm.
makes a huge difference for people. So they're not, I mean, they're not most improved in the sense that they were awful one day, but they were definitely a more technical company and are now one of the most design-driven companies in the world. So I think it's a really interesting case study.
With some good examples, yeah.
No.
Maybe that's a good time to wrap things up. Unless you want to.
So what do you think? While we're still in the air, what did you think about this new
live reaction,
new live conversation experiment?
Well, I had fun. I enjoyed talking to you.
Cool.
What about you?
I definitely think like the format got me to say and think about things that I wouldn't normally think and say, and I don't think I would ever have this opportunity while I'm interviewing a guest. Like sometimes I throw in a little something that kind of connects with what they're talking about, but I'm very mindful of it being their time, so I don't get to think and share so much. So I enjoyed it. I hope we'll see that. First of all, I hope it actually went live. Anywhere. I mean, clearly on LinkedIn it's been live because we got some comments. But I think it's I think it's potentially really cool. So I would love to continue doing this.
Yeah, well, I felt for me it was like interviewing the interviewer, so or role reversal for the podcast. So that's fun.
That makes you the super interviewer. That makes you like.
This is basically like the chain of designers, and there's also a chain of interviewers. Someone has to interview me.
It's like a therapist who takes care of therapists. You have to be extra good.
That's true.
Right? So it's like to interview the interviewer. That's like. Anyway, awesome. Cool. Thanks, Louis. I'm going to end this broadcast and then we can say a few words afterwards in private.
Okay.